The church was silent, save for the creak of old pews and the faint hum of distant traffic. Lynn Gwynn stood at the altar, her white dress clinging to her like a lie she couldn't shed. The bouquet in her hands, lilies her favorite, felt heavy, their sweet scent now sour with betrayal. She was 28, a Vietnamese-American photographer who'd spent years capturing life's fleeting moments. But she hadn't seen this coming. Not Amy, her fiancé of 3 years, walking out the night before with a half-assed note. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." Lynn's breath hitched, a sharp, ragged sound in the empty chapel. The guests were gone, sent home with awkward apologies. Her best friend Mai had stayed until midnight, rubbing her back, whispering, "You're enough, Lynn. You're more than enough." But the words didn't stick. They couldn't fill the hole Amy had carved out. Outside, the California sun blazed, mocking her. Lynn dropped the bouquet on the altar, petals scattering like confetti from a party that never happened. She grabbed her camera bag, her one constant, and walked out, the click of her heels echoing like gunshots. The honeymoon was non-refundable. A week in a coastal Oregon cabin, all rugged cliffs and crashing waves. Amy had planned it, her perfect escape. Lynn could have canceled, could have curled up in her apartment and drowned in wine and self-pity. But something in her snapped. Screw it. She'd go. Alone. The drive up the Pacific Coast Highway was a blur of blue ocean and winding roads. Lynn's old Honda rattled, the radio spitting static and heartbreak anthem she couldn't stand. She rolled down the window, letting the salt air sting her face. By the time she reached the cabin in Yachits, the sky was bruised purple, and her chest felt less like it was caving in. The cabin smelled of cedar and damp earth, with a wide window facing the sea. She dropped her bag and stood there, listening to the waves roar, relentless, like they were trying to tell her something. The next morning, Lynn woke to the screech of gulls and the soft patter of rain. She pulled on jeans and a flannel, grabbed her camera, and wandered into town. Yachits was small, all weathered storefronts and driftwood art. The kind of place where everyone knew your name by lunch. She found a coffee shop, the Daily Grind, its windows fogged with warmth. Inside, it smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, the air humming with quiet chatter and the hiss of an espresso machine. Behind the counter was Riley Carter, 27, with auburn hair tied loosely and a smile that hit Lynn like a punch. Riley's apron was dusted with flour, her hands quick as she steamed milk. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice low and warm like a song Lynn hadn't realized she needed to hear. Lynn fumbled, ordering a latte she didn't even want. Their fingers brushed when Riley handed her the cup, and Lynn's heart did a stupid, traitorous flip. "You're not from here," Riley said, leaning on the counter, her green eyes curious. "Tourist." "Something like that," Lynn muttered, her throat tight. She wasn't ready for small talk, not with Amy's absence still a raw wound. But Riley didn't push. She just nodded like she understood, and went back to wiping the counter, humming softly. Lynn sat by the window, pretending to check her camera, but her eyes kept drifting to Riley, the way she laughed with regulars, the way her hands moved steady and sure. That afternoon, Lynn walked the beach, her boots sinking into wet sand. The ocean was wild, waves crashing against jagged rocks, spraying her with cold mist. She lifted her camera, framing the chaos, trying to lose herself in the shutter's click. But her mind wandered to Amy, her laugh, her promises, the way she'd sworn they'd grow old together. Lynn's chest ached, and she let out a shaky breath, the sound swallowed by the wind. Back at the coffee shop the next day, Riley was there again, this time with a smudge of coffee grounds on her cheek. Lynn couldn't help it. She reached out, almost instinctively, to point it out. "You've got something," she said, gesturing. Riley laughed, swiping at her face, and their eyes locked for a second too long. "Thanks," Riley said, softer now. "You're Lynn, right? I heard you say it to the guy at the bakery." Lynn nodded, surprised Riley had noticed. "Yeah, just passing through. Looks like you're carrying something heavier than that camera," Riley said, her tone gentle but direct. Lynn froze, her defenses flaring, but Riley's gaze was kind, not prying. "I get it," Riley added. This town's good for hiding out. Or finding yourself. Depends on what you need. Lynn didn't know what she needed. Not yet. But as she sipped her coffee, watching Riley move through the shop like she was born to it, something in her stirred. A spark, faint but stubborn, like a match struck in the dark. By the third day, Lynn was a regular. She'd sit with her camera, sketching ideas for shots, while Riley slipped her free pastries. On the house, she'd say with a wink. They talked in fragments. Lynn's photography gigs. Riley's dream of opening her own cafe someday. Lynn learned Riley was born in Portland, raised by a single mom, and had a laugh that made the room feel brighter. Riley learned Lynn was from San Francisco, her parents immigrants who'd never quite understood her art, or her love for women. One evening, Riley invited Lynn to a bonfire on the beach. Just locals, she said. No pressure. Lynn hesitated, her heart still bruised, but the thought of another night alone in the cabin was worse. She went, and there, under a star-streaked sky, with the fire crackling and the ocean's low roar, she felt something shift. Riley sat close, their shoulders brushing, and when she handed Lynn a beer, their fingers lingered. Lynn's pulse raced, and for the first time in days it wasn't from pain. The bonfire's glow painted Riley's face in shades of amber, her eyes catching the light like sea glass. Lynn sat cross-legged on a driftwood log, the cold bottle in her hand slick with condensation. The air smelled of smoke and salt, the ocean's rhythm a steady pulse beneath the laughter and strumming of a guitar nearby. Lynn's camera rested in her lap untouched. For once, she didn't want to hide behind the lens. Riley leaned closer, her flannel sleeve grazing Lynn's arm. "So," she said, her voice cutting through the crackle of the fire. "What's the story with the camera? You carry it like it's your lifeline." Her tone was light, but her gaze was steady, like she could see the weight Lynn was carrying. Lynn's fingers tightened around the bottle. She could brush it off, change the subject, but something about Riley, maybe the way she really listened, made Lynn want to talk. "It's my way of making sense of things," she said finally, her voice low. "The world's messy, but through a lens I can frame it. Make it mine." She paused, the words catching in her throat. "Lately, though, it's not enough." Riley nodded like she got it without needing more. "I used to write poetry," she said, almost shyly. "Back in high school. Thought I'd be the next big thing, you know? But life got in the way. Now I just pour coffee and dream about it." She laughed, but there was a wistful edge to it, a crack in her easy confidence. Lynn glanced at her, surprised. "You don't seem like someone who gives up on dreams." Riley shrugged, poking at the fire with a stick, sparks flying into the night. "Dreams are heavy. Sometimes you gotta set 'em down to keep moving." She looked at Lynn, her expression softening. "What about you? What's got you so heavy?" Lynn's chest tightened. She hadn't told anyone about Amy. Not the whole story. But the words spilled out before she could stop them. "I was supposed to get married," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Last week. Amy left me the night before. No warning. Just a note." She laughed, a brittle sound. "I came here because I don't know. I didn't want to fall apart at home." Riley's face shifted, a flicker of anger mixed with something softer. Empathy, maybe. "That's bullshit," she said bluntly, then winced. "Sorry. Who does that? Leave someone like you standing there." She shook her head, her hand brushing Lynn's knee. A fleeting touch that sent a jolt through her. Lynn swallowed, her throat dry despite the beer. "Someone who didn't want me enough," she said, the words cutting deeper than she meant them to. She stared at the fire, the flames blurring as her eyes stung. Riley didn't say anything for a moment, just sat there, her presence steady like the tide. Then she nudged Lynn's shoulder. "Come with me tomorrow," she said. "I'm off work. There's this trail up the cliffs, best view in Yatchits. Bring your camera. Maybe you'll find something worth framing." Lynn hesitated, her instincts screaming to pull back, to protect the raw edges of her heart. But Riley's smile was a challenge, warm and stubborn, and Lynn found herself nodding. "Okay," she said, her voice shaky but sure. The next morning they met at the trailhead, the sky a pale gold as the sun climbed. Lynn wore her hiking boots, her camera slung across her chest like armor. Riley carried a backpack, her hair loose and catching the light. The trail was steep, winding through pine trees and wildflowers, the air sharp with sap and salt. They walked mostly in silence, the crunch of gravel and their steady breaths the only sounds. Lynn's legs burned, but it felt good, like she was outrunning something. At the top, the view stole her breath. The Pacific stretched endless, waves crashing against rocks far below, the horizon smudged with clouds. Lynn lifted her camera, framing the scene, but Riley's laugh broke her focus. "You're missing it," Riley said, spreading her arms wide, her face lit with joy. "Put that thing down and just feel it." Lynn lowered the camera, her heart pounding. She stepped closer to the edge, the wind tugging at her hair. And for a moment she did feel it, the vastness, the freedom, the ache of being alive. Riley stood beside her, close enough that their elbows brushed, and Lynn's skin tingled where they touched. They sat on a flat rock, sharing Riley's thermos of coffee, the steam curling in the cool air. "This place," Riley said, "it's where I come when I need to think, or not think. Just be." She glanced at Lynn, her eyes searching. "What do you need, Lynn?" Lynn's breath caught. She didn't know how to answer, not when Riley's gaze made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice raw. "I thought I needed her, Amy. But now I just want to feel like me again." Riley reached out, her hand resting on Lynn's, warm and steady. "You will," she said, her voice fierce with conviction. "You're already starting to." That night, Lynn lay in the cabin, the ocean's roar filtering through the walls. She couldn't stop thinking about Riley, her laugh, her touch, the way she seemed to carry light with her. It scared Lynn, how much she wanted to lean into it, how much she wanted to let go of Amy's ghost. But the fear wasn't just about moving on. It was about trusting herself again, trusting her heart not to break. The next day, Lynn found herself back at the daily grind, her camera forgotten on the cabin table. Riley grinned when she walked in, like she'd been waiting. "No camera today?" she teased, sliding a latte across the counter. "What's the occasion?" Lynn smiled, a real one, small but genuine. "Maybe I'm trying to see things without it," she said. Riley's eyes softened, and Lynn felt that spark again, brighter now, like it was burning through the fog. The coffee shop was quieter that morning, the usual hum of conversation dulled by a soft drizzle outside. Lynn sat at her usual table by the window, watching rain streak the glass, her fingers tracing the rim of her latte cup. The air smelled of wet pavement and fresh-baked scones, and Riley's voice carried from behind the counter, joking with a customer about the weather. Lynn's chest felt lighter today, like the rain was washing away some of the weight she'd been carrying. But the lightness scared her. It felt too much like hope, and hope was dangerous. Riley slid into the chair across from her during a lull, her apron still tied, a smudge of flour on her forearm. "You're awfully quiet today," she said, her tone playful but her eyes sharp, like she could see the storm brewing in Lynn's head. "What's up?" Lynn's fingers stilled on the cup. She wanted to deflect, to keep things easy, but Riley's gaze pinned her in place. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "Of feeling okay. Of feeling anything." She let out a shaky laugh, her eyes dropping to the table. "Sounds stupid, right?" Riley leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her voice low and steady. "Not stupid. Not even a little." She reached out, her fingers brushing Lynn's wrist, a touch so light it felt like a whisper. "You got hurt, Lynn. Bad. It's okay to be scared of what comes next." Lynn's throat tightened, her pulse jumping under Riley's touch. She wanted to pull away, to retreat to the safety of her camera, her solitude. But Riley's hand stayed there, warm and grounding, and Lynn didn't move. "What if I mess it up?" she whispered. "What if I let someone in and it all falls apart again?" Riley's lips curved, a small sad smile. "Then you pick up the pieces and keep going. You're already doing it." She squeezed Lynn's wrist just once before letting go. "You're tougher than you think." Lynn didn't feel tough. She felt raw like an exposed nerve, but Riley's words stuck, burrowing into the cracks of her doubt. They talked for hours that day, the coffee shop emptying out as the rain picked up. Riley told stories about her mom, a nurse who'd worked double shifts to keep them afloat, and her own failed attempt at college, where she'd partied too hard and flunked out. Lynn shared pieces of her own life, her parents' quiet disapproval of her lifestyle, the way photography had been her rebellion, her freedom. By the time Lynn left, the rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and sharp. She walked back to the cabin, her boots splashing through puddles, her mind replaying Riley's laugh, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners. It was dangerous, this pull she felt, but it was also alive, electric, like the first deep breath after being underwater too long. The next day, Lynn woke to a text from Riley. "Meet me at the lighthouse at 6. Got something to show you." Lynn's stomach flipped, a mix of nerves and excitement. She spent the day restless, wandering the beach, her camera clicking at driftwood and seaweed. But her thoughts were on Riley. At dusk, she drove to the Heceta Head lighthouse, its beam cutting through the fog like a promise. Riley was waiting, leaning against a low stone wall, her hair glowing in the fading light. She wore a denim jacket, her hands stuffed in the pockets, and when she saw Lynn, her face lit up. "Come on," she said, grabbing Lynn's hand without hesitation, pulling her toward a narrow path behind the lighthouse. Lynn's heart raced, her palm warm against Riley's, the contact sending sparks up her arm. The path led to a secluded cove, the sand silver under the moon, the waves a low, steady roar. Riley spread out a blanket, pulling out a thermos and 2 mugs. "Hot chocolate," she said, grinning. "Figured we could use something sweet." They sat, the blanket barely big enough, their knees brushing. The air smelled of salt and cocoa, and Lynn felt something loosen in her chest, something she hadn't realized was still knotted. They talked about nothing and everything, favorite movies, worst dates, the way the ocean made them feel small but not insignificant. Riley's voice was a low hum, her laugh a melody Lynn wanted to memorize. At one point, Riley leaned back on her elbows, staring at the stars. "You ever feel like the universe is trying to tell you something?" she asked, her voice soft. "Like it's nudging you toward, I don't know, something better?" Lynn looked at her, the moonlight catching the curve of her jaw, the softness in her eyes. "Maybe," she said, her voice barely audible. Her heart pounded and she wanted to say more, to confess the way Riley made her feel alive again, but the words stuck. Instead, she reached for Riley's hand, her fingers trembling. Riley didn't pull away. She laced their fingers together, her thumb brushing Lynn's knuckle, and Lynn's breath caught, a sound lost in the waves. They stayed like that until the air grew cold, the silence between them heavy with possibility. When they finally packed up, Riley walked Lynn to her car, their shoulders brushing. "See you tomorrow?" Riley asked, her voice hopeful, almost shy. Lynn nodded, her throat too tight to speak. As she drove back to the cabin, the lighthouse beam fading in her rearview, she felt it, the spark growing into a flame warm and terrifying. She wasn't ready, not fully, but she was starting to believe she could be. The cabin was too quiet that night. The ocean's roar a distant hum through the walls. Lynn lay on the creaky bed, staring at the wooden beams above, her mind replaying the cove, Riley's hand in hers, the warmth of her thumb, the way her laugh felt like sunlight breaking through fog. Lynn's heart thrummed, a mix of thrill and dread. She wanted to lean into this, to let herself fall, but Amy's shadow lingered, a cold weight whispering she wasn't enough. Morning came with a gray sky, the air heavy with the promise of rain. Lynn drove to the daily grind, her camera slung over her shoulder like a shield. The bell above the door jingled, and Riley looked up from the espresso machine, her smile instant, unguarded. "Thought you might bail," she teased, sliding a latte across the counter. "You look like you didn't sleep." Lynn's lips twitched, a half smile. "Bad habit," she said, her voice rough. She sat at her usual spot, the window cool against her shoulder, and watched Riley move through the shop, pouring coffee, wiping tables, her hands quick but gentle. Lynn lifted her camera, framing Riley in a candid moment, her auburn hair catching the light, her laugh mid-bloom. The shutter clicked and Riley glanced over, raising an eyebrow. "Caught me," she said, mock indignant, but her eyes sparkled. She wandered over, leaning on Lynn's table. "You gonna show me those shots someday?" Lynn hesitated, her fingers brushing the camera. "Maybe," she said, her voice softer than she meant. "If you're lucky." Riley grinned, undeterred. "I'm feeling pretty lucky lately." The words hung there, light but loaded, and Lynn's pulse spiked. She wanted to say something, anything, but her throat closed up, and Riley was called back to the counter before she could try. That afternoon, Lynn wandered the cliffs again, the wind sharp and salty, tugging at her jacket. She shot photos of the jagged rocks, the foam curling over them like lace, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept seeing Riley's face, hearing her voice. "You're tougher than you think." Lynn wanted to believe it, but doubt clawed at her. Amy's note echoing in her head. "I can't do this." Back at the cabin, Lynn's phone buzzed. A text from Mai. "You okay out there? Don't ghost me." Lynn typed back a quick "I'm fine," but her fingers hovered over the screen. She wanted to tell Mai about Riley, about the way her heart kept tripping over itself, but the words felt too big, too fragile. Instead, she scrolled through her photos, pausing on the one of Riley, her smile, her ease, the way she seemed to belong to this place. The next day, Riley invited Lynn to a local art fair, a small setup in Yatchet's community center. The room smelled of paint and cedar, filled with booths of pottery, watercolors, and driftwood sculptures. Riley wore a green sweater that brought out her eyes, and Lynn couldn't stop staring. They wandered together, Riley's arm brushing Lynn's as they laughed over quirky ceramics and shared a caramel apple, the sticky sweetness lingering on Lynn's lips. At one booth, Lynn lingered over a small painting of the ocean, its colors turbulent, alive. "It's like you," Riley said, her voice low, almost reverent. "All storm and beauty, holding it together even when it's rough." Lynn's breath caught, her cheeks warming. She wanted to laugh it off, but Riley's gaze held her, steady and sure, and Lynn felt exposed in a way that wasn't entirely bad. They ended the day on a bench outside, the air cool, the sky streaked with pink. Riley's knee pressed against Lynn's, a quiet anchor. "You're leaving soon, aren't you?" Riley asked, her voice careful, like she was bracing for the answer. Lynn's stomach twisted. She hadn't let herself think about it. The end of the week, the return to San Francisco, to the life Amy had shattered. "Yeah," she said, her voice barely audible. "Day after tomorrow." Riley nodded, her jaw tight. "Well, we've got 2 days then." She turned to Lynn, her eyes fierce. "Let's make 'em count." The next morning, Riley showed up at the cabin with coffee and a plan. A kayak trip on the Yatchet's River. Lynn was nervous, she'd never kayaked, but Riley's confidence was infectious. They paddled through calm waters, the air thick with the scent of pine and mud, the paddles splash mingling with Riley's easy chatter. Lynn laughed more than she had in weeks, her shoulders loosening, her guard slipping. At a quiet bend in the river, they stopped, letting the kayak drift. Riley leaned back, her hands behind her head, staring at the sky. "You ever think about starting over?" she asked. "Not running away, but building something new?" Lynn's throat tightened. She thought about her apartment, her photography, the life she built with Amy that now felt like a ghost town. "All the time," she said. "But it's hard to know where to start." Riley sat up, her eyes locking on Lynn's. "Start where you are," she said, her voice soft but fierce. "Right here. Right now." She reached out, her hand cupping Lynn's cheek, her thumb brushing the corner of Lynn's mouth. Lynn froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. The world narrowed to Riley's touch, the warmth of her palm, the quiet promise in her eyes. Lynn leaned in just a fraction and Riley closed the distance. Their lips met, soft at first, then hungry, the kiss tasting of coffee and river air. Lynn's hands found Riley's shoulders, pulling her closer, and for a moment the world was just them. 2 women, one broken, one steady, finding each other in the quiet of a river bend. The kiss lingered on Lynn's lips, a warmth that spread through her chest like wildfire. The kayak rocked gently beneath them, the river's soft lapping mixing with the thud of her pulse in her ears. Riley pulled back first, her breath uneven, her green eyes wide and searching. Lynn's hand stayed on Riley's shoulders, anchoring her to the moment, afraid to let go. The air smelled of damp earth and pine, and the sky above was a soft gray, heavy with the threat of rain. "Lynn," Riley whispered, her voice rough like she was afraid of breaking something. "You okay?" Lynn nodded, though her heart was a mess of fear and want. "Yeah," she said, her voice barely steady. "More than okay." She laughed, a shaky sound, and Riley's face softened, a smile tugging at her lips. They sat there, the kayak drifting, their hands still touching, the world quiet except for the river and their breathing. Back at the cabin that evening, Lynn couldn't sit still. She paced the small living room, the creak of the floorboards loud in the silence. Her phone sat on the table, unanswered text from my glowing on the screen. "Spill it, Lynn. What's going on up there?" Lynn wanted to call her to tell her about the kiss, about Riley, but the words felt too big, too raw. Instead, she grabbed her camera and flipped through the photos she'd taken. Riley laughing at the art fair, Riley silhouetted against the cliffs, Riley's hand reaching for hers in the kayak. Each image was a piece of something new, something Lynn wasn't sure she deserved. The next day was her last in Natchez. The thought twisted in her gut like a knife. She met Riley at the daily grind, the familiar smell of coffee and cinnamon wrapping around her like a hug. Riley was quieter than usual, her movements behind the counter deliberate, her smile tight. Lynn sat at her table, her camera untouched, her fingers tapping restlessly against her cup. "You're leaving tomorrow," Riley said, sliding into the chair across from Lynn during a break. It wasn't a question. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her, a flicker of something vulnerable beneath the surface. Lynn nodded, her throat tight. "Yeah. Back to San Francisco." She paused, the words heavy. "Back to whatever's left." Riley leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her hands clasped. "What's left doesn't have to be all you've got," she said, her voice low, fierce. "You get to decide what comes next, Lynn. You don't have to carry her with you." Lynn's eyes stung, Amy's note flashing in her mind. "I can't do this." She wanted to believe Riley, wanted to believe she could let go. But the fear was a stubborn knot in her chest. "I don't know how," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I thought I had it all figured out with her. And now—" Riley reached across the table, her hand covering Lynn's, warm and sure. "You don't have to figure it all out now," she said. "Just don't close the door on what's right in front of you." Her thumb brushed Lynn's knuckles and Lynn's breath hitched, the touch pulling her back to the river, to the kiss, to the possibility of something more. That night, Riley invited Lynn to her apartment, a small place above the coffee shop with mismatched furniture and walls covered in Polaroids. It smelled of lavender and fresh laundry, and a record player spun soft jazz, the notes curling through the air like smoke. They sat on the couch, a bottle of wine between them, and talked about Riley's dream of a cafe with live music, about Lynn's hope to publish a photo book someday. The conversation flowed easy, but the air was charged, every glance and touch heavy with unspoken questions. Lynn's eyes kept drifting to Riley's lips, her hands itching to reach out. Riley noticed, her smile turning shy, and she set her glass down, scooting closer. "Lynn," she said, her voice a low hum. "If you want to stop, just say so. No pressure." Lynn's heart pounded, but she didn't want to stop. She leaned in, her lips finding Riley's, and this time the kiss was deeper, hungrier, like they were making up for lost time. Riley's hand slid to Lynn's waist, pulling her closer, and Lynn's fingers tangled in Riley's hair, the world narrowing to the heat of their bodies, the soft sounds of their breaths. They pulled apart, foreheads resting together, both breathing hard. "Stay," Riley whispered, her voice raw. "Just for tonight." Lynn hesitated, her mind screaming warnings, too fast, too soon, too much like falling. But her heart was louder and she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Okay." They fell asleep tangled together on Riley's couch, the jazz record still spinning, the rain tapping softly against the windows. Lynn woke at dawn, Riley's arm draped over her, their legs entwined. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel alone. But the weight of her departure loomed, a ticking clock she couldn't ignore. Morning came too fast. Lynn packed her things at the cabin, her hands shaking as she zipped her bag. Riley met her at the coffee shop one last time, her eyes red-rimmed, like she hadn't slept either. "You'll come back, right?" Riley asked, her voice trying for light but failing. "Yatchits isn't that far." Lynn's chest ached. "I want to," she said, and she meant it, but the words felt fragile, like they could break under the weight of reality. They hugged, Riley's arms tight around her, and Lynn breathed in the scent of her shampoo. Citrus and warmth, trying to memorize it. As Lynn drove away, Yatchit shrinking in her rearview, her phone buzzed. A text from Riley. "You're not alone, Lynn. Not anymore." Lynn's eyes blurred with tears, but she smiled, the road stretching ahead, open and uncertain. The highway stretched endless before Lynn, the Pacific a gray shimmer to her left as she drove south. The radio was off, the only sounds the hum of her Honda's engine and the occasional whoosh of passing cars. Her hands gripped the wheel, knuckles pale, Riley's text burning in her mind. "You're not alone, Lynn. Not anymore." She wanted to believe it, wanted to hold on to the warmth of Riley's arms, the taste of her kiss, but San Francisco loomed ahead, a city full of ghosts. Amy's ghost. Her own. Back home, her apartment felt foreign. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of dust and forgotten takeout containers. Lynn dropped her bag by the door, her eyes catching on the framed photo on the counter. Her and Amy laughing at a street fair, their arms around each other. Lynn's stomach twisted. She turned the frame face down, the clatter loud in the silence. She wasn't ready to throw it out, but she couldn't look at it either. The next few days were a blur of routine. Lynn edited photos from Yatchits, the images of Riley, her smile, her silhouette against the cliffs, pulling at something deep in her chest. She texted Riley small things at first, "Made it home. Missed the ocean." Riley's replies were quick, warm, "Miss you more. Come back soon." Each message was a lifeline, but Lynn couldn't shake the fear that this, whatever it was, would fade, just like Amy's promises had. At night she lay awake, the city's hum filtering through her window. Car horns, distant sirens, the low buzz of life. She thought about Riley's apartment, the jazz record, the way their bodies had fit together on that couch. She thought about the river, the kiss, the way Riley's eyes had held hers, steady and unafraid. Lynn's fingers brushed her lips, chasing the memory, and her heart ached with a mix of longing and guilt. Guilt for moving on, for wanting to. A week after her return, Lynn met Mai for coffee at their usual spot in the Mission District. The cafe smelled of espresso and fresh bread, the air thick with chatter. Mai, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, eyed Lynn over her cappuccino. "You look different," she said, her voice probing. "Spill. What happened in Oregon?" Lynn hesitated, her fingers twisting the napkin in her lap. She told Mai everything, the cliffs, the bonfire, Riley, the kiss. Mai's eyes widened, a grin spreading across her face. "Holy shit, Lynn. You like her. Like her. Lynn's cheeks burned. "It's not that simple," she said, her voice low. "I barely know her." And after Amy, she trailed off, the napkin now shredded in her hands. Mai leaned forward, her expression fierce. "Amy doesn't get to define you." She fucked up, Lynn. "Not you. This Riley girl. She sounds like she sees you. Really sees you. Don't let that go because you're scared." Lynn's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to say she wasn't ready, but Mai's words echoed Riley's. "Start where you are." She sipped her coffee, the bitterness grounding her, and nodded. "I'll try," she said, the words feeling like a promise. That night Lynn called Riley. The phone rang twice before Riley's voice came through, warm and a little breathless. "Hey, stranger. Was starting to think you forgot about me." Lynn laughed, the sound surprising her. "Not a chance," she said, settling onto her couch, the city lights glinting through her window. They talked for hours about Riley's day at the coffee shop, Lynn's latest photo project, the way the ocean looked at dusk. Lynn's chest felt lighter, like she was breathing for the first time in weeks. Over the next month, their calls became a ritual. Lynn sent Riley photos of San Francisco, neon signs, foggy hills, street art vibrant with color. Riley sent back pictures of yachts, driftwood on the beach, her coffee creations, a selfie with a smudge of foam on her nose. Each exchange was a thread weaving something fragile but real. But the distance gnawed at Lynn. San Francisco was loud, crowded, a constant reminder of Amy's absence. She missed the quiet of yachts, the salt air, the way Riley made her feel like she could be whole again. One night after a long call with Riley, Lynn sat at her desk, her laptop open to a job listing, a photography gig in Portland just a few hours from yachts. Her heart raced at the thought, fear and excitement tangling together. She applied, her hands trembling as she hit send. The next morning she told Riley, her voice shaking over the phone. I might move closer, she said, the words heavy with possibility. There's a job. In Portland. Riley's silence was brief, but Lynn heard her breath catch. Lynn, she said, her voice thick with emotion. That's huge. You sure? No, Lynn admitted, laughing softly. But I want to be. I want to try. Riley's laugh was bright, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Then come try with me, she said, and Lynn could hear the smile in her voice. A week later, Lynn got the job. She packed her apartment, the photo of Amy still face down, untouched. As she loaded her car, her phone buzzed. A text from Riley. Can't wait to see you, camera girl. Lynn smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in months, and hit the road, the horizon open and waiting. Portland's rain was relentless, a soft patter against Lynn's windshield as she pulled into the city. The air smelled of wet concrete and pine, a sharp contrast to San Francisco's salty fog. Her new apartment was small, a studio with bare walls and a single window overlooking a brick alley, but it felt like a blank canvas, a chance to start over. She unpacked her camera first, setting it on the table like a talisman. Riley was only 2 hours away now, and the thought made Lynn's heart race, equal parts thrill and terror. Her first week in Portland was a whirlwind of new faces and photo shoots. The job, a contract with a local magazine, had her chasing stories, street musicians, food truck festivals, protests in the rain. She loved the work, the way it forced her to see the world through her lens. But her mind kept drifting to yachts, to Riley's laugh, her steady hands, the way she'd kissed her like it was a promise. They texted constantly, called when they could, but it wasn't enough. Lynn needed to see her. On her first free weekend, Lynn drove to yachts. The road wound through forests, the trees dripping with mist, the air thick with the scent of moss and earth. Her stomach knotted with nerves as she pulled into the Daily Grind's parking lot, the familiar bell jingling as she stepped inside. Riley was behind the counter, her auburn hair loose, her apron tied sloppily. When she saw Lynn, her face lit up, a grin that made Lynn's chest ache. You're here, Riley said, vaulting the counter with a laugh, pulling Lynn into a hug that smelled of coffee and cinnamon. Lynn's arms wrapped around her, her cheek pressed against Riley's hair, and for a moment, the world was just them, warm and solid. They spent the day together, wandering yachts' beaches, the sand cold under their boots, the waves a steady roar. Riley held Lynn's hand, her fingers laced tight, like she was afraid Lynn might slip away. They talked about everything: Lynn's new job, Riley's plans for her cafe, the way the ocean made them both feel small but alive. At one point, Riley stopped, picking up a smooth stone and handing it to Lynn. For luck, she said, her eyes soft. Lynn slipped it into her pocket, her fingers brushing the rough edge, a small anchor. That night they went back to Riley's apartment, the jazz record spinning again, its notes weaving through the air. They cooked dinner together, pasta with too much garlic, the kitchen filled with laughter and the clink of wine glasses. Lynn felt lighter, like she was shedding layers of hurt with every smile, every touch. After dinner they sat on the couch, Riley's head on Lynn's shoulder, their hands tangled together. I'm scared, Lynn admitted, her voice low, the words spilling out in the quiet. It feels too good. Like I'm waiting for it to break. Riley lifted her head, her eyes searching Lynn's. I'm scared too, she said, her voice steady but raw. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. She leaned in, her lips brushing Lynn's, soft at first, then deeper, a kiss that felt like a vow. Lynn's hand slid to Riley's waist, pulling her closer, and the world fell away, leaving only the warmth of their bodies, the soft hum of the record, the rain tapping the windows. They spent the night together, this time in Riley's bed. The sheets soft and warm, their limbs tangled in the dark. Lynn woke to the sound of Riley's breathing, steady and quiet, her arm draped across Lynn's stomach. For the first time in months, Lynn didn't feel the weight of Amy's absence. She felt present, whole, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. But the past wasn't done with her. A week later, back in Portland, Lynn got a text from Amy. Can we talk? I miss you. Lynn stared at the screen, her heart lurching, a sick mix of anger and longing twisting in her gut. She didn't respond, but the message lingered, a crack in the new life she was building. She told Riley about it over the phone that night, her voice shaking as she read the text aloud. Riley was quiet for a moment, then said, What do you want, Lynn? Not what she wants. What you want. Lynn's throat tightened. She thought about Amy, her laugh, her promises, the way she'd left without looking back. Then she thought about Riley, her warmth, her steadiness, the way she made Lynn feel seen. I want you, Lynn said, the words raw but certain. I want this. Riley's voice softened, a smile in it. Then you've got me, she said. I'm not going anywhere. Lynn deleted Amy's text, her hands steady for the first time in days. She drove to Yatchet's the next weekend, her camera in the passenger seat, her heart lighter. Riley was waiting at the coffee shop, her smile bright, and when Lynn kissed her it felt like coming home. The months blurred into a rhythm of weekends and late-night calls. Lynn's life split between Portland's hustle, photo shoots, deadlines, city noise, and Yatchet's quiet, where Riley's apartment became a refuge, its walls alive with Polaroids and the hum of jazz. Lynn's camera captured it all. Riley pouring coffee, her hands dusted with flour. The Yatchet's cliffs at dawn, mist curling over the rocks. Their shadows stretched long on the beach, hands linked. Each photo was a piece of something solid, something Lynn was learning to trust. Winter came, the Oregon coast turning wild, the ocean a churning gray under heavy skies. Lynn's work kept her busy, but Yatchet's was her anchor. She and Riley fell into a pattern. Lynn drove down every other weekend, her car packed with camera gear and takeout for the road. They'd cook, laugh, kiss until the world felt small and safe. Riley started sketching plans for her cafe, napkins covered in doodles of tables and string lights. Lynn photographed them, framing Riley's dreams, her own hope growing alongside them. But Amy's text had left a scar, a quiet doubt that surfaced in the still moments. Lynn would catch herself wondering, had she been enough? Could she be enough for Riley? She didn't voice it, but Riley noticed, her green eyes sharp, catching the way Lynn's smile faltered sometimes. One night, curled up on Riley's couch, the rain pounding outside, Riley took Lynn's hand, her thumb tracing slow circles. You're quiet again, she said, her voice gentle but firm. Talk to me. Lynn's chest tightened, the words stuck. I keep waiting for this to go wrong, she admitted, her voice low. Like I'll wake up and you'll be gone too. Riley's jaw tightened, but her eyes stayed soft. She shifted closer, her hand cupping Lynn's face. I'm not her, Lynn. I'm not going anywhere. She kissed Lynn, slow and deliberate, like she was sealing the words into her skin. Lynn melted into it, her fears quieting, not gone but softer, less sharp. Spring brought change. Lynn's magazine contract was extended, and Riley found a small space in Yatchet's for her cafe, a weathered storefront with big windows. They spent weekends cleaning it, painting the walls a warm cream, the air thick with the smell of paint and sawdust. Lynn hung her photos, ocean shots, Riley's smile, moments of their life together. Riley named the cafe Driftwood, a nod to the beach where they'd first connected, and Lynn's heart swelled every time she saw the sign. Opening day was chaos. Locals packed the tables, the espresso machine hissing, Riley's laugh cutting through the noise. Lynn was there, camera in hand, capturing it all. Riley pouring lattes, her apron smudged with coffee. Customers chatting over scones, the sunlight streaming through the windows, painting the room gold. Lynn felt a pride she hadn't known she could feel, not just for Riley but for herself, for choosing this, for staying. That night, after the last customer left, Riley locked the door and pulled Lynn into a dance. The radio playing soft indie rock, the room smelling of coffee and sugar. Lynn laughed, her head on Riley's shoulder, their bodies swaying in the dim light. "We did it," Riley whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You and me." Lynn's eyes stung, but she smiled, her heart full. "Yeah," she said. "You and me." A year after Yachet's, Lynn moved there permanently. Her Portland apartment traded for a small house near the beach, close enough to hear the waves. She worked freelance, her photos gaining traction online, galleries reaching out. Riley's cafe thrived, a hub for locals and tourists, its walls a gallery of Lynn's work. They built a life together, messy and real. Arguments over dishes, mornings tangled in bed, quiet evenings with wine and the ocean's roar. One day, walking the cliffs, Riley stopped, pulling Lynn close. The wind was sharp, the air salty, the sun low and golden. "I love you," Riley said, her voice steady, her eyes locked on Lynn's. "I want this forever. You in?" Lynn's breath caught, her heart pounding, but there was no fear this time, only certainty. She nodded, her voice breaking. "I'm in." They kissed, the ocean crashing below, and Lynn felt at home, not just a place but a person. A life she'd chosen. Back in San Francisco, the photo of Amy was long gone, replaced by one of Lynn and Riley, laughing on the beach, their hands linked, the horizon endless behind them. Lynn didn't need to frame the world anymore to make it hers. She had Riley, and that was enough.